Hey, podcaster, if you want to sound more engaging and expressive, it all starts with good vocal health. But what if I told you that it actually can be fun? My guest today is Nic Redman. She's an award-winning podcaster with over 20 years of experience as a voiceover artist and over 8 as a vocal coach. She's been coaching everyone you can imagine, big and small, and she makes vocal health and in podcasting so awesome. We cover a few things from why maybe impersonating your favorite podcaster is actually doing more harm than good, how to sound yourself, how to sound more expressive, but at the same time, or a few exercises that you can do in order to not finish an interview absolutely exhausted. So just stick with us because it's going to be an amazing interview. I'm Nic Xavier, and this is The Podcast Space, a podcast that's imperfect, ethical, and practical that will help you move forward in your podcast journey. Nic, I am so excited to welcome you to the show because we are, I feel like, lifelong friends right now.
Forever. When did we not know each other?
Yeah, and I think that I found you through LinkedIn, and since then, I just adore your content. Let's start this interview by me showering you with compliments.
Well, if we have to.
We must. And your approach to vocal health and vocal guidance is just so refreshing. And literally the word, the expression that I used to describe you is, you're a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, well, you know how I feel about breath, so that's very flattering. Thank you.
Yes, no, but it's true because I feel like I had vocal training in the past a gazillion years ago, but I probably remember like 2% of what I learned at the time. But it was mainly like for journalists, so not the same thing. But I think it was really interesting that every single kind of connection that I've had with people who work in the industry, it was very like strict and following the rules and being almost like, dare I say, boring. And you make it so fun and attainable. So,
well, that's good. That is honestly my main MO with the whole thing. There are loads of amazing voice teachers out there who teach in a myriad of different ways, and they're all incredibly valuable. And I've trained with a lot of people who have very different styles that have all impacted me in some way. But one of the things that always was underlying with me for voice training sometimes was feeling a little bit like, was I really worthy of it? And should I be getting it? You know, it was only at drama schools or on performance courses or for people who were like big speakers or politicians, people who had something very important to say. And for me, my whole thing has been trying to boil it down and reduce it to something that is digestible and useful for everybody who has a voice, because when it comes to podcasting and business and everything, your voice is incredibly important. And, you know, I work with corporate speakers and all kinds of speakers. And even corporate speaking isn't about minding your P's and Q's and trying to be proper and organised. It's about passion and communication and having a story to tell. And for me, that has to come from like a real place and somewhere that you've gone through a journey to understand how your voice works and how your thought processes work and how your breath works. And that's what I'm trying to do, is trying to bring it down and sort of present it to people in a way that's digestible. And then personally, everything I do, because of my background in comedy, and I'm married to a comedian for my sins, is like everything always comes through a lens of comedy, whether it's appropriate or not, to be honest, Anna. Like sometimes I make jokes and they definitely shouldn't have made those. You know, that should have been a club, a drunk on a Friday night gag. That shouldn't have been a voice class gag, but sometimes you just go there. And humor's always been a way for me to connect with people. And the lovely thing about laughter and humor and fun is that actually you can tie it directly into voice technique. So laughter and feeling what your body does when you laugh is a brilliant way to feel voice support and what your body does on those really primal sounds. So it's literally useful for learning about your voice, as well as making it digestible and stomachable and something that you want to do.
I love that. So basically, everything that you were saying about how, you know, you're bringing in something that you're passionate about, but also kind of makes you unique in the industry. And I think that today in the podcasting industry, I feel that it's so important to remember that just because someone else is doing something or they're very popular, or they're super successful with that specific thing. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't mean that you have to follow the same recipe. And especially with personal branding, I think the more you really lean into your personal qualities and what you love is going to be the differentiator, not just long term, because you're going to be excited to be doing your own brand and being yourself, but also to quickly attract more people. So do you feel like that was an easy process for you for your podcast, actually?
Yeah, one of the things that I always struggled with when I was training to be a voice practitioner and when I did my master's was trying to fit the mold of what a voice teacher should be. And I literally did a project on it and investigated it from a research point of view, like where was the line when it came to how much of me I could bring into the space. And what I didn't realize was that all those other people who were teaching in their way were just bringing themselves into the space. They weren't trying to be anything else. So all I can do is bring what I have into the space, which is something that comes with humor. And what I've tried to do with the podcast is replicate that. But I'm lucky because, I started my solo podcast, the Voice Coach podcast, having done another podcast that was co-hosted for like 6 years. So I was familiar with the context and what a podcast was. And I was familiar with that approach. And also, I had 6 or 7 years to really hone my pedagogy and my method as a voice coach within the confines of me as a person. So by the time I did that podcast, I was very comfortable with what I wanted it to sound like. And I listened to a lot of other podcasts on voice, and a lot of them come with such remarkable research and anatomy and all that kind of stuff, which I know. That's my job as a coach, to know all that stuff. But I knew that the people I was reaching or wanted to reach didn't need to know all that. They needed to know the results and what it could help them with. They needed to know bits and bobs in digestible, easy ways, but they didn't need to know, all the intrinsic and extrinsic muscles of the larynx or whatever the hell it was. So my whole branding sort of idea with that podcast was to make it easily digestible, fun, like me talking to you going, right, come on, get off your arse and let's do this wee bit of voice work and we'll see what happens. And you could almost say it took the entirety of my career to get to a point where I was comfortable doing that. And if I'd done this podcast as soon as I'd been out of my master's training like 7 years ago as a voice coach, it probably would have been a very different thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I feel like we kind of forget that as people, we are on our own journey to becoming more ourselves as we go through life, as we age, right? It doesn't just come right away. So before we forget, is the Voiceover Social, that was the podcast you co-hosted, right?
Yeah, the Voiceover Social podcast was the one I co-hosted for, probably 8 or 9 years.
I listened to that one a lot, and I also listened to your own podcast, which will have all the links over in the description. But tell me a little bit about what was it like for you? Because of course, during the pandemic, we saw a growth of not just people being on meetings, but people launching their podcasts. So they started using their voice a lot more. So did you feel like that was actually really helpful for your industry, or was it so much that also like other coaches were in the space? Like, how did you realize that you were like, okay, there's a market or there isn't?
I think I benefited professionally, personal stuff aside, from the pandemic in 2 quite distinctive ways. Number one was I'd actually been coaching online for quite a while with clients across the world as a voice coach. That's sort of what happens sometimes when you can't get there, So I was doing sessions, so I was familiar with the online process, but clients weren't as comfortable with that process. So I'd had chats with people who'd wanted to coach with me, but then gone, I'd rather do it in person, actually. Thanks very much. Goodbye. And I was like, no problem. There's nothing we can do about that. Even within the UK, people in London or people in Scotland or whatever. So what I then got was, everyone's online. I can come to you now, which was really nice. And then the other way I benefited was the fact that a lot of people were finding themselves in front of microphones before in a way that they'd never done before, or talking in a way they'd never done before, or treating their voices or their voice habits or vocal load was very different to how it had been before. For example, I had one corporate client who's worked for a very, very, very big bank over here, and he was struggling because, yes, he talked all day in work and he was talking all day at home, but he was talking all day through a screen, which is a very different feeling. You know, you don't have the same energy to build off. You don't have the same stability a lot of the time if you're not used to it in the body. And the people you're talking to seem further away, and you know, there's a lot of pushing goes on. But also, he used to have an hour's commute from his home to his office where he didn't say a word, where he got to listen to podcasts and chill out. So he was getting breakfast with his family and his kids, sitting on the tube, having an hour of silence, then going to work doing his 6-7 hours of talking, then having an hour's vocal rest on the tube on the way home again, and then continuing with his family life. So what he found when he went online from home was that he wasn't getting those 2 hours of actually, as it turned out, very important vocal rest for him, bookending that voice use. So he found himself just getting incredibly vocally tired, you know, because he was going from breakfast straight onto the school run, then straight into the office, virtual office, then straight out of the virtual office into chat with his wife and with his kids and bedtime, and he was just vocally exhausted. So there were lots of different ways that people were using their voice that all of a sudden they needed help with. And I was like, hello, I'm here. Yeah. And I had been working with a business coach at the time who had, in terms of other people in the industry doing it, I was very it was advantageous for me because I was sort of 6 months ahead of setting up an online community because I'd been working with a business coach for about 3 or 4 months before the pandemic started. So I'd already started a Facebook group. I'd already thought about online courses anyway. I was already thinking about that stuff. So I was a wee smidge ahead. And then, you know, 6 months to a year after, lots of other people were, you know, understandably doing it as well.
Oh, I love that. I had no idea. And that's why I love talking to you. I always learn a little bit more about your journey. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And for the listener right now, I want to remind you that, yeah, like you can actually be ahead without noticing. And then when things happen, you're like, oh, when I'm looking back at like how things worked out, there was just like a path that you were already doing. So I think that people forget that all the work that you're doing today right now is compounding to, you know, this moment in the future, where you'll realize that actually, you know, you are not behind, because in the online space, it's so easy to look back and just think, oh, everyone's doing so much better than I am, or I'm behind, or like you were saying, like you were doing it slightly differently. You were already doing virtual work, and people were like, not really. But then you were actually ahead. So, food for thought there.
Well, as well, we're always growing, aren't we? So even though you are where you are right now, with all incredible achievements behind you, you're constantly trying to think of what the next thing is. So it's really hard not to reflect back. I just had a chat with my father-in-law who's just started like jive lessons with his wife, which is so cute. And he's like, I'm just so bad at it. And then the teacher last night said to them, yeah, but remember all the bits you've learned in you've only been doing it 4 weeks, and you've learned all these steps to now, and now you're working on a new step. And it's like, you master all the stuff and you forget about it because it's in your body then, and you move on to the next step. And it's the same with business. You know, I look back at all I've achieved, or as I'm writing my book now, it's like I can only write this book because of all the things that have come before. And that's really exciting. And if I'd tried to write this book 5 years ago, it would have been a very different book and probably terrible. And now it's going to be less terrible and a little bit more informed. So like, you know, everything, you're right, everything leads to everything you're doing leads to the next thing. It is nice to sort of reflect back and go, oh yeah, I'm doing okay actually.
That's true. That's true. And so talking a little bit about what are the most common things? I want to get into the practical things because we're both here very practical. And so what are things that podcasters do that are really hurting their voice? And also, we're going to get into something else, which is the adrenaline that happens when interviewing, because we had this conversation on the pre-interview, and it was such an interesting conversation. So tell us a little bit about what people are doing that they have to stop doing right now.
Okay, so the first and most damaging thing that any podcaster can do, potentially, is try and sound like somebody that's not them. So try and sound like they think they should sound. Sound like a podcaster, sound like the podcaster they love listening to, or try not to sound like the podcaster they don't like listening to, you know. As soon as you start pretending or putting on some kind of vocal facade, you're working outside of what is your habitual comfort range, and that comes with stress and tension and additional pushing. So the first thing I get people to reflect on is, do you sound like how you want to sound? Is how you want to sound how you sound normally anyway? In which case, brilliant. We just need to find that comfort and that confidence in that sound that you already have. Or do you need to sound a different way because it's a different style of podcast, or you need to reflect something else to represent your business brand? And then we can seek to find that in a way that's healthy and free. So I think the first thing is trying to make yourself sound like somebody else. Because as soon as you do that, it's not as easy. Speaking is not as easy as it can be. So that's the first thing.
So before you move into the second one, let me just do a little bit of a side note here. I think that people are listening and like, well, how do I figure out what I sound like? And I think a big starting point can be listening to a variety of podcasts, because I feel like a lot of people are listening to the people that either sound like them or that sound like they think they should be sounding, like very professional, very serious, la la la, or very fun. And so just kind of like listening to a variety of shows will give you an insight into what's possible, right? So yeah. I guess that would be a good starting point.
Yeah, and when you're thinking about how you should sound or how you need to sound, you've got to remember who you're talking to and what they might expect, if that's something that's important to you. Or if you're like, this is me, and they'll listen to it if they're interested in what I've got to say, then don't worry. But it is worth thinking about what you're trying to say, how you'd like it to come over, and how you want people to receive you a little bit.
Yes, I love that, because a lot of people think I have to or I should. So it's like, what do you actually want, and go from there. So what's the number 2?
Not understanding how easy it is to warm up, to make things easy for yourself. So, when you're having like a batching day, or you're doing a couple of big interviews and you're like excited or nervous or tense, it really doesn't take a lot to make things easy for yourself and have a 5-minute warm up, a 3-minute reset, vocal reset between episodes, a bit of a 5-minute cool down at the end. It's just about making the space for it in your routine, in the same way you make space for making sure your notes are there, making sure your mic's turned on, doing a little sound check. Doing a wee warm-up needs to be a part of that process. And my whole thing is, it doesn't have to be difficult. It can be really fun and silly, which is great for your adrenaline management and great for your mood before you get on the microphone. It just needs to be there, because warming up helps release tension. It helps engage the breath. It helps clear up any articulation issues and trip ups that might be happening. And it just saves you time. So finding the time for a little warm up will save you time in your edit, because you'll mess up less.
Oh yeah, I love that tip.
Plus, you get to know your voice while you're warming up, which means you're sort of going through the process of sounding more like you need to sound, or sounding like yourself, or getting more expression. It helps with expression and range and so many things. And ultimately, my biggest thing is warm-ups save you time.
And when you're talking about range, that is so true, because you hear people and they're just using a percentage of their voice. And if they did a proper warm-up, you come across, especially if you're just doing an audio-only podcast, you really want the sound the voice to sound as full. And by full, I mean the biggest range you can really get in.
Yeah, I one of the things I get from podcasters is, I don't think I sound as expressive and engaging as I think I'm being when I record. So it's that disparity between how they think they're coming across versus how it's heard. And that's down to a couple of things. But one thing is not warming up so you don't have the freedom, and you don't have access to the range. And number 2, second guessing yourself and listening to yourself all the time and trying to sound a particular way. Like if you try to sound happy, or you try to sound motivating, or you try to sound empathetic, or whatever it is you need to sound, it's not going to sound authentic, and you're not going to believe yourself when you hear it anyway. So, it's about a couple of things, like reframing who you're focusing on, and thinking more about the listener and how you want to make them feel rather than how your voice sounds. And it's just loads of different psychology things you can think about as well. But at the root of it is knowing your voice and being able to prep your voice. And it does not have to take 45 minutes of, rolling around on the floor, breathing into your bum and humming. I mean, you can do that. It feels great. But it can also just be 5 minutes of silly jiggling.
Remind me, there's some exercises on your website, right?
Yeah, there's a warm-up for podcasters, a free download, both a video and an audio on my website. So if you head to the resources section, you can find it there. It's called Free Podcaster Warm-Up.
Okay, perfect. Then we'll have, again, all the links in the description so that people can access those easily. And then they can even subscribe to your podcast. They can subscribe to your newsletter, all these things.
All the subscribings. Subscribe.
Yes. And then mic technique. One of the things that I realized and that I had this conversation when I was a producer in studios was helping people actually set up. And the biggest thing that did it, and for all the people listening on audio format, I'm sorry, you're going to have to watch the video first off because Nic is super entertaining and you have to follow along on our facial expressions. And number two, because we're going to do a lot of demonstration on here. And so I actually can't really necessarily move my microphone a lot because this guy is like super weird. It's just like it rumbles and does all these noises. But one of the things that I noticed was like the straining of the neck. And I'm going to try to hang on. Okay, there we go.
Chin jut.
Right, so it's like, they're just like, okay, you know what? And now you really have to watch the video. They're like straining and they're like, oh, because that's the podcast position because it's like sideways and it's like cool. And I'm like, is there a microphone even for that? Probably not. But you saw someone on the internet do that and you're like, I should do that. So no strain on the neck, but also like get yourself comfortable. You can set up the studio for yourself and your needs instead of like, grab some books and prop them instead of just sitting and slouching or whatever, because that's going to affect the vocal fold, chords, the vocal. So tell us.
This is where I come in.
Yeah, sorry.
And handing over to Nic. Yeah. You're right, though. I try to boil it down to get yourself set up physically and then bring the mic to you, not yourself to the mic. In one way, that's quite a simple way of thinking about it. If you need to be closer to the mic, bring the mic to you rather than you reaching forward to the mic. So it's definitely, your vocal freedom is also related to the freedom you have to move within your environment, because your body needs to be free for the voice to be free. When you're straining forward with the chin jut, as we call it, imagine a turtle poking its head out, in the morning sun, kind of craning forwards. That's the best image I've found so far. A little turtle. Hello. Just recording my podcast now. Morning. So just resist the turtleneck, as it were. I can't use turtleneck, of course, though, because that's an item of clothes. So the chin jut, it's about, I forgot where I am now. What it does, that's it. So what it does is that I was just enjoying my turtlenecking so much, is it just puts a kink in the speaking tube. That's like, and what that does is make it harder. So like when you're drinking from a straw and the straw is straight, the fluid comes up nice and easily. If you're a little kid and you bend the straw to kind of suck through it, you have to suck harder. So it's exactly the same with voice. If there's like a kink in your speaking tube, it's going to be harder for the voice to come out. So you've got to just align the body in a way that is efficient, easy, and allowing for release of as much excess, unnecessary tension as possible. And that requires just keeping an eye on the old chin jut.
That in itself are 2 TikTok videos that you should be doing to demonstrate.
Oh, God.
Your TikToks are so funny.
I think people chin jut because it's so good for your double chin as well. Stretching underneath. Apparently good for the old face yoga. But for me, it's got to get the nose back to the spine. I don't need those TikTok commenters coming in telling me about my chins, Anna. I've already been called Tin Tin. And a man. Which is fine. I don't mind.
Oh, you're on the side of TikTok that people are nasty? Because I feel like I've gotten some like sassy comments, but my previous guest, Lloyd George, who was talking about like he built his community on TikTok, and he was like, it's so supporting, and I'm like, that's clearly your experience.
Well, it's true, isn't it? Though you remember the negative ones more than the others. I mean, I've had like only 3 or 4. I had one reel that went viral, and I got some epic stuff in there. There were also lovely people saying really lovely things, but there were also some absolute, as we would say in Ireland, head the balls, which is people who are a little kooky.
I mean, I feel like TikTok comedy for vocal health is just gonna take over. You just have to lean in, and
I'll look into it. Yeah,
I think you should. Starting with a turtle.
Give me a like if you're a turtleneck. Try this instead. like and subscribe.
There you go. There's your first one. So something that I love about your branding is that you're really, especially your podcast, I'm listening and you're taking us through an audio journey. It feels like you're really using a lot of sounds and just kind of making it really relaxed. And so if someone is trying to really get into a more, I can say more authentic, but also like less quote unquote right, what are the tips that they can follow in order to get quote unquote their voice?
Yeah. So in voiceover, I think we call this like conversational read. And it's the idea that you're just having a chat with somebody. And it's really big in advertising at the moment, which is probably why I'm quite good at it. You know, everybody wants to be sold to by the person down the pub. They don't want to be sold to by the guy with the big voice anymore. So it's all about like, hey, do you want to buy this thing? That'll be so great. Well, here it is. And with podcasting, there are a couple of things you can think about. Number one is, remember, you're always talking to one person. So it's always a one-on-one conversation. It's like that amazing Terry Wogan idea that, you know, Terry Wogan was this massive presenter for the BBC in the UK. He's absolutely huge, biggest radio presenter ever. And someone said to him, how many listeners have you got? I mean, it must be amazing. And he said, always one. And I just think that's beautiful. Because it is. It's always one person. So you've got to remember you're in one person's ears, having a chat with one person. No matter the energy of your podcast, it's always one person. And bearing that in mind and aligning that with who your brand, you know, who your ideal client is step one to sounding useful to them and real to them. So that's the first thing. Second thing is stop worrying about how you sound and focus on what you're trying to say and how you're trying to make them feel. So I do a lot of techniques that help people connect emotionally with how they're trying to make that person feel and how they want that person to react, what they need them to do or click or subscribe or buy or action. And that takes the focus away from your voice and you completely forget about it. And then you don't hear the things that we get so obsessed with taking out, like clicks and like smacks and trip ups and fumbles and stuff, because we as humans are used to hearing that. Like, I listen to conversation all the time that is imperfect and bumpy. That's how we're used to processing sound. And, you know, give the listener some credit. If your message is good enough and if you know what you're talking about and if you really care about what you've got to say, they're not going to be bothered if you trip up over your words or if you're a bit clicky or if you have a bit of vocal fry or if you have what we call nasal farts in the business with that little weird sound at the back of your nose. Like, nobody cares. If they want to hear what you've got to say and they need what you've got to say, then they're going to listen. So forget about... It's not about you, it's about them, is the other thing. And then I use lots of, so a couple of other things I recommend are if you're scripted, if you need to read from a script, fine, but write the script by speaking it. That's another one. And experiment with bullet points instead. Also, if you write a script, whatever way, don't be afraid of going off script. You know, if something comes to your head, just go off piste and then find your way back. If it's terrible, you can edit it. Like, it doesn't matter. So play around. And I do really implore people to stop being so obsessed with really hardcore edits. And I think this is a bigger thing than just you and your podcast. This is a social expectance thing. This is the idea that everybody who's in the media and on the telly and on the radio and on podcasts is perfect and speaks just perfectly and beautifully and never messes up. It's so much more important for us as humans to know that we're all fucking human. So if you make a mistake or you say an F instead of a TH because you're from Yorkshire or whatever it is, then just let it happen.
Yes, let's be more human. Let's start the movement of being more human in the podcast.
Yeah, because what's on the way? AI. And the only way we can compete against AI is being human. Like, that's all we've got. They can do everything that we can for longer, in more expression, more. What we have is the fact that we're real, living, breathing human beings. And that is our privilege, and that's exciting.
Oh my God. I feel like almost I should finish the podcast here, but I still have to ask you an important thing.
Okay, fine.
That is about anxiety. And I was talking to you the other day while we were preparing for this interview. And I was telling you, hey, like I migrated from doing the podcast, podcast in audio form. That was my experience, or being behind the mic as a producer, to doing video podcasts. And I feel so exhausted. Where granted, of course, I know that I have to look at the camera. There's a gazillion other things, but let's talk a little bit about why that happens. Because I was like, why is that happening, Nic? Why do I feel so exhausted? I feel like I can't even record the intro.
Well, it's because it's firstly for podcasters. We have grown up, as it were, in the podcasting space, not having to worry about what we look like and not seeing ourselves back. And that's freeing and lovely. And our faces do weird things when we talk. And sometimes you don't want to see that on camera. So it's sometimes horrific seeing yourself back. And we can go into many reasons as to why we hate how we look, but that's not what that's here. That's not why we're here. So the first thing is it's self-consciousness, and we're fighting against that maybe imposter syndrome or that fear we have of showing up and seeing ourselves. I feel like I'm over that because I do so much on Zoom now. It's like, oh, that's my face. Yep, that's all I've got. That's the only face I've got. So like it or don't. There's nothing I can do about it. I mean, I could inject things in there, but I'm not going to. The other thing is there's just more to think about, isn't there? Like I did this, I'm trying to record episodes of my podcast live into my Facebook group, so it's useful for the community there who maybe don't podcast. Then I'm trying to take that recording and put it on YouTube. So there is this expectation that it's going to be there for ages and that you can't mess up because the edit is harder if you're going to edit it, or that you have to do it in a oneer without messing up. So that's pressure. And also, you're thinking about more. There's a camera. There's where your notes are. There's a light. There's, did I put makeup on? Should I put makeup on? There's just my top match my branding. There's the mics there. It's like, should I wear headphones? Should I not wear it? Like, there's so much more to think about. And then, of course, there's the, body energy, which has to be different when you show up on camera. When I record my podcast, I'm not thinking about how my presentation skills look to somebody else. I'm focusing on affecting my listener. I'm not worrying about what my hands are doing, which honestly, a lot of the time is some crazy stuff because, I'm quite a gesticulatory person. So you're also going, is that too much? Do I need another hand movement? Do my hands move too much? So there's a whole body thing going on. And ultimately, all of this stuff affects your breath. And you stop breathing deep enough. And then you get tired. Your belly tenses up, your shoulders tense up, your neck tenses up, your voice gets harder to make. And it all comes down to breath, which is linked to, anxiety for many different reasons that I've just blabbered about. Oh, God, that was exhausting.
So is there a quick exercise that you can teach us to help with our breath before we sign off?
Yeah. Let it go. Let it out. One thing that speakers do a lot is focus on the in-breath. And actually, it's so much more powerful for release and authenticity and relaxing the nerves and preparing yourself to let your breath go. So historically, if someone's anxious or nervous, people go, okay, take a deep breath. And they go, and they end up with loads of oxygen really high in the chest. And it really makes them feel worse. What I focus on now, and what a lot of we'll not talk about breath work for mental health and stuff right now, but at least what I focus on for voice is let the breath out to let it in. So if you let your breath out and you wait, guess what happens? Your body breathes back in again for you. Otherwise you die. So the whole thing about breathing is do less to get more. Like if you just let your breath out, think about the thought that you're going to that you need to say, release your belly and let the breath in. Your body will take the breath that it needs to get through that thought, and off you go, happy days. If you sit at the mic and you're like, right, okay, right, I've got my mic, I've got my headphones, got everything, got my notes, got my pencil, got my water, cameras there, lights there, everything's ready. Right, let's go. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. My name's Nic. Straight away, you're starting from like a really tense place. And the best thing you can do is just take a moment and go, and you you can edit it out. It doesn't matter. Or you can go and own it and go, hi, it's me again on camera, because that's what we have to do now. And off you go. But let the breath out. That's my one tip, to sort your breath out.
That is so good and so actionable. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
So you have a book coming out, which we will talk about in an upcoming episode, which we're actually going to record right after this one. Spilling the tea.
Batch recording. Behind the scenes.
We're doing it. So tell us a little bit about all the links, not a little bit about, tell us where people can find the links to all of these good things and how they can work with you. And if it's just going to your website and tell us just URL, and I'll put all the links below, we can do that too.
Yeah. So I have distilled everything I've learned so far of, 20 years as a voiceover artist, 8 years as a podcaster, 4 or 5 years doing speaking panel spots and speaking gigs and Q&As and all that kind of stuff, being live on the radio for press interviews, all that kind of stuff as a speaker and a voice user myself, plus my 7 years as a voice coach working in top-end drama schools, working with high-end corporates, working with hundreds of clients in a myriad of different ways and retreats and one-to-one and with online courses. I've distilled it all down into a book because it's it's what you got to do, isn't it? Have to have a book. It's called On the Mic, Voice Training for Voiceovers, Podcasters, Speakers and Presenters. And it's all about getting your voice prepared and looking after your voice when you're a microphone user. And I'm really excited about it because I think it's quite good.
I am so excited too because, first off, I've been following along kind of like what you've been sharing, the behind the scenes. And also I already signed up to the wait list, which we'll have links to, and I'll talk on social media so people can go ahead and get them added on the list, because it is for podcasters, for anyone who uses a voice professionally, right? So it's not just for someone who is just trying to make a career in voice acting or professionally. It's just for everyone.
Yeah, I suddenly realised that my community is not just voiceover artists anymore. Really excitingly, I would say I'm 40% voiceover artists, audiobook narrators, and 60% podcasters, people who are speaking in public, people who have to show up on screen or on mic in some way, even people who just go live for social media. I said just go. Even people who go live for social media, because that's a huge part of business now. That's all mic speaking. And it all takes, a slightly different approach, I think. And it sometimes takes an approach that needs to be quick and to the point and efficient and organised. So this isn't a voice book like a lot of the voice books that have come before that takes, which are all incredible and I love and work with all the people who've written them, by the way. It's amazing. But this is more about getting to the point of the release and trying to find easy and quick ways to release your breath, get ready to be speaking, deal with those nerves, get your voice free and open and expressive so that you can be as comfortable on the mic and as clear and as connected to your audience as possible.
Yes, I love all of that. And thank you so much for sitting with me. For sitting with us. There we go. Thank you for sitting with us. You're such a lovely human, and I am so glad to have you in my community and that you're able to get your amazing message out there. So thanks, Nic, for being here.
Thanks for having me, you lovely human.
Stop it now. All right. So you lovely human podcaster listening to this interview, please know that everything that is available about Nic, it will be in the show notes because ain't nobody got time to memorize anything. So go there. Also, if you want to learn more about the podcast space, go to thepodcastspace.com/podcast. We also have /resources for all the free resources you can kind of read and watch to grow your podcast. And obviously, always reach out to me on social media at the podcast space. Instagram is kind of my jam, so I want to hear from you there. All right. Have a great day.